So recently I dabbed my toes into the world of performance driving through the form of autocross, and I decided I really wanted a Mazda MX-5 Miata, which is kind of the gold standard sports car. And I came this close to buying two different Miatas, but I bought something else instead. Any ideas? Don't do that, Case. That totally gave it away. Anyways, any other ideas before Case gave it away? I'll give you a hint. It's got a supercharger. So this is a 2006 Mini Cooper S, and I think in a lot of ways this is a better vehicle than a Mazda MX-5 Miata if you're looking for fun on a budget. Here's why. So it may seem kind of an odd choice to cross up a Miata with a Mini Cooper, because obviously the Miata is a rear-wheel drive convertible sports car, and the Mini, at least on the face of it, is an economy car that's front-wheel drive and not that exciting. But I'd go as far as to argue that a used Mini Cooper, especially the first gen of the BMW Minis, is in a lot of ways more fun than an early Mazda Miata. Let me walk you through my arguments. Now, of course, like any stereotypical car review, we gotta start with the engine. But to pop the hood on these older Minis, you actually do it over here on the passenger side. So once the hood is popped, there's a latch on the driver's side, and then the whole thing lifts up in one ginormous clamshell. Now, older Miatas, the NAs or NBs, which are around the same price as these old Minis, have 4-cylinder engines, naturally aspirated. The Cooper S has a 1.6 liter engine, but it's forced inducted with a supercharger. One of the best parts about these older Minis. Now, horsepower 163, torque 155, but it's that supercharger whine that really makes this a truly special experience. And the other cool thing is, the new Minis, they're running 2-liter turbocharged engines in the Cooper S, and everything nowadays has a 2-liter turbo, from Lexus NX crossovers to Land Rover Defenders to, of course, Golf GTIs. I'm just getting a little tired of the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo. The supercharger in this car is super inefficient for the size of the vehicle, figure 25 miles per gallon, but incredibly fun and super linear. This does not make its peak power until the very top of the rev range. Peak torque comes in at 4,000 RPM, unlike the new Minis that come in at 1,300. So you really have to wring them out to have a lot of fun, but the supercharger screams and off you go. There are a ton of really funky design elements underneath the hood of these older Minis. For example, to fill up the windshield washer fluid, you've got a reservoir over here on the right side of the vehicle. However, the reservoir specifically for the headlight squirters is over here on the complete opposite end of the car in its own separate container. Now, you might notice that the hood opens up in a very big way. It's supposed to give you as much access as possible to the engine. Doesn't really work though, because most stuff you need to do on this engine, you have to put the front end into something called service mode, which sounds super easy and convenient, but to access service mode, pretty much everything in the front needs to come out. The bumper, the radiators, all of it needs to come off, and then you can access a lot of the ancillaries to the engine. But the funny thing about this hood is that the headlights actually rise up with the clamshell. I'm not super sure you're allowed to do this today, by the way, because not really sure you're allowed to have these main headlight units on a movable surface. The other drawback to this design is if you close the hood too hard, it's quite easy to actually break or damage the headlights themselves. So you want to be pretty careful with how you do it. I mean, more careful than that. That was crap. So back when these cars debuted in 2003 for the Cooper S, the sporty models had a hood scoop, and they continue that trend today. However, back in the day, there was a reason for it. It's actually extremely functional, because underneath the hood scoop is the intercooler for the supercharger. So it sucks air in directly from the front of the vehicle and feeds the intercooler. Nowadays, of course, the Mini Cooper S's are turbocharged. The hood scoops are largely just there for a visual aid to differentiate the S from the non-S. There have been 3 generations of modern day mini hatch. This is the first generation. They call these the R53 if you want to get kind of nerdy about it. They started production for the 2003 model year and built them through the 2006 model year. None of that matters. What matters is that these are the best size of the modern era of Mini, in my opinion. They are super, super small, which means they're lightweight and incredibly nimble. Some 10 inches shorter than the modern day Mini hatch and 2 feet shorter than like a 2020 Volkswagen Golf. They also look fantastic. I know it's supposed to pay homage to the original Mini, which I also own, but in some ways I think that the BMW and Rover team did a better job of designing the reincarnation than the original. It's nice and upright, not very aerodynamic, but it's got a great kind of charming face, super simple beltline. I like how the roof and the beltline kind of converge here at the back. It just looks like a little mini Hot Wheels, very clean, not as bulbous as the new ones, and overall, just a fantastic piece of modern day design. So one of the most interesting things about the Cooper S, of course, are the dual mounted exhausts. Now, the original exhausts like this car are really pretty tiny. Oftentimes you see aftermarket ones with huge giant things, but from the factory, it was really small. Now the Cooper S, the sporty models, had dual exhausts out the middle, and the standard Coopers had a single exhaust out the side. So now for the part that's going to determine, is this a true pocket rocket? What's the driving experience like? And I have to say, it is phenomenal. The steering incredibly darty, and the car weighs under 2,700 pounds, which is incredibly light for a modern car, or at least a car from the modern era that has airbags and lots and lots and lots of airbags and disc brakes and ABS and all that kind of stuff. So they did a good job of keeping the weight down, and you really feel it in the turns. Now you can pick up an inside tire if you push it hard enough, and yes, it will understeer if you enter a turn too quickly, but the steering is incredibly progressive and very heavy. Actually, all the controls in this car are surprisingly heavy, specifically the steering and the clutch. This clutch could have been out of like a Mustang GT350. It really is ridiculously heavy, but super linear. Now, of course, the power is not available in every gear. You have to be toward the top of the rev range, which of course you want to be, so you can hear that little supercharger sing. But one of the main reasons I love these cars so much is because they're just chock full of weirdness. They've got so much charm and personality and character, and you really see that when we start getting to the crazy gadgets and gizmos on the inside. One of the best parts about these older Minis is they were super, super highly configurable, and pretty much no two are the same. And when you're buying one, you want to find kind of a funky configuration like this one. Specifically, I love these seats. The two-tone white and black, it's just a lot of fun. They do tend to wear over time, but it is a genuine leather. They feel pretty darn good, even some, 18 years later. And you can even get these seats in a bright red on black. There's also like a tan and a yellow on black, so tons and tons of different colors. But the seats in these cars are really pretty good. The next weird thing are the line of switches, toggle switches across the center of the dash, and they feel fantastic. Not super cheap, actually. They feel quite high quality, and they control a number of things from the windows to the door locks to the fog lights. Now, if you are missing some options, you basically miss teeth in this line of switches. So I'm missing one tooth here for the rear fog light, but apart from that, they're all filled in. One other kind of quirky thing on these cars, to put the windows down, they're one touch down. To put the windows up, you actually have to dig your finger underneath them and hold them up until they rise all the way. You could get these Coopers with sunroofs. That's right, not sunroof, but sunroofs, which was pretty advanced for the early 2000s. So this car has 2 sunroofs. Now they are covered by these little nets. They don't fully block out all the sun, but they do a pretty good job, and the front one's open. The rear one also has a net, but the rear one doesn't open, but really brings a lot of airiness into the cabin, although it also adds a lot of weight up high, so if you're looking to track one of these, maybe find it without the sunroof. The steering wheel on this car is just flat out bizarre. It is a 2-spoke design, 2 giant spokes that connect the rim to the middle of the wheel, and you've got buttons on either side. So the horn is actually buttons on both the left and the right side, and you got cruise control. The volume and the tune buttons are actually behind the steering wheel, like on modern day Chrysler products. If you hate the steering wheel, don't fret, because the 05 and 06 models had a more traditional wheel, which I think looks far better, but it's kind of funky. The climate control panels on these cars are really pretty cool and very funky. This one has the automatic climate control, but you can see it's actually in the shape of the Mini logo with the wings and then the circle in the middle. You can, of course, adjust it manually using fan controls, or if you set it in auto, you can adjust the temperature by twisting on this center circle, and there's a little display in the middle that lets you know what temperature you're setting it to. Plus, if you bring the fan up and down, look at that. Look how it shows you your fan speed. Creates like a little sun. Pretty cool. So this car has 2 gauges mounted here in front of the steering wheel. The one on the left, of course, is your tachometer, and the one on the right is a speedometer with a little digital readout and then some warning kind of lights there in the middle. But you're probably thinking, isn't Mini known for having the giant central gauge? They are, but this car doesn't have it because it has the optional navigation and computer. That's right, even in 03 you could get this car with GPS navigation. Now, first of all, the computer, push in on this little wizard's hat, and this is how you control all the menus. Very unintuitive by modern day standards. Also 30.5 mpg, wildly optimistic from my experience. It's definitely more like mid-20s. But then let's talk about the navigation. So the navigation does still work even 18 years later, but it is extremely slow and super clunky. Plus, it's obviously not connected to the internet, so if new roads have been built, such as our tollway here in Colorado since 03, it just thinks you're driving at 80 miles an hour through a field. And you also have to turn it the wrong way to zoom in and out. The little wizard's hat is very unintuitive. It does do something pretty clever though. I mean, look, it knows where the different gas stations are near you, which is kind of cool. And of course you can plug in different destinations. It just takes you 1,000 years because you have to use a combination of itty bitty little twists to basically plug in different letters and addresses, and oh, it's a big pain. Now here in the middle of the car are your mirror controls and naturally your heated seats, because that makes sense why they'd be right next to each other. But 2-position heated seats, and these get so hot you could legitimately bake a honey baked ham on either heated seat and, you know, probably burn it. They're just berserkly hot. Now behind that is kind of an interesting little button. See that right there? TPMS reset. This car was one of the first cars, I think, that had tire pressure monitoring systems because they didn't have spares, and they are supposed to run flat tires, which at least back in 2003 totally ruined the ride. So compared to a Miata, and I know I shouldn't have compared this car to a Miata because I just dug myself a grave, but it genuinely was my #1 cross shop. These cars are so much more comfortable, and I am about 6 foot tall, and I just don't fit very well in an NA or an NB Miata. Even if I spend minutes trying to get all the positions right for the seats, I'm not very comfortable in them. But in this car, check this out, because of course, at this point, the Rover Group was under BMW control. They had to build them for German tall people, which means that even at 6'1", if I put the seat all the way back, there's no way I can drive this car comfortably. Plus, I've got tons and tons of headroom. These are really spacious cars on the interior, and I know it's just a fun car to zip around canyons in, but it still is good to be comfy. Of course, being a Mini, all the seat controls have to be backwards, so over here in the middle is where you adjust the recline for both the driver and the passenger seat. And then there's also height adjustment pumps, and then on the right side here you've got the forward and back. But this is my driving position at 6 feet tall. Let's see what the rear seat is like. Press in, it automatically shifts forward. Okay. Well, to be honest, not all that excellent. I do have real headrests. You know, I could probably withstand like a 25-30 minute trip back here, even in my driving position, but my feet are getting pretty squished. Still, if you have dogs or groceries, or you need to move some kids around in an emergency, this is an option. So what about the trunk and the usability in the back of a Mini Cooper? Well, as Case would say, trunk small, so not exactly a massive trunk, but you can make it far more usable by simply folding down the rear seats. They fold down one at a time, and then you've got pretty good room. For example, my Bernese Mountain Dog does fit in there surprisingly well, actually. It doesn't quite fold flat, of course, but still very usable. Okay, let's see how this little 1.6 responds to a lot of throttle. That's first gear, nothing, and there it goes all the way up to 6,500 RPM, 6,600 RPM. By modern standards, it really isn't all that quick, but because the car is so small, it feels super zippy. Now, this engine is called the Tritec engine because it was co-developed by 3 countries. The UK, as in the Rover Group, later BMW, Brazil, where the engine was made, and America, with Chrysler. That's right, this is a co-developed Rover Chrysler unit, and nothing says reliability like Rover and Chrysler. But the funny thing is, they're actually pretty good. There's a lot of stuff that breaks on these Minis, but the engine itself is pretty durable. At 100,000 miles, you do have to service the supercharger, which is a really, really big job and quite expensive. I'm only at 93,000 miles, so I've got 7,000 more miles to deal with. And that brings me to, of course, the elephant in the room, which is reliability. Is this going to be as reliable as a Toyota or a Mazda or a Honda? Absolutely 100% certifiably not. These cars are like maintaining little BMWs, and stuff is stupid expensive. So for example, I bought this car a couple weeks ago for $6,700, and within the last 10,000 miles, it's had $8,000 put into it. $8,000, including a new clutch. But that's what you want to do with these cars, is buy the best one you can afford with the most service history. And that is key, and it's getting harder and harder, you see, because these cars are like maintaining an early 2000s BMW, but they're shaped and priced like a Mini. People just didn't do it. And the vast majority of them kind of fall into this pit of disrepair where they'll never escape from, where even basic maintenance is more than the car is worth. So pay more, overpay like I did for one that you know is good with a good service history and low mileage, and then, you know, go from there and keep up on the maintenance, because that's what really kills them. But if you do that, they're just so fun. I really have a soft spot for these cars, and I think they have the potential to be collectible, because while there are a lot out there, there are not a lot out there in original and good condition, and they're getting harder and harder to find. So maybe snap them up now while they're still cheap, drive them, hold on to them, and we'll see what happens, because the era of supercharged four cylinders, I think, is coming to an end. So yes, I know it's a flawed vehicle and they are expensive to maintain, but they're just super fun, and they're getting really hard to find in good condition. You see a lot of the second and the third gens, but the first gens were abused and then not maintained, and then oftentimes crushed, actually. So finding one, you know, with relatively low miles and good service history is just becoming almost impossible nowadays. I'll keep you updated and let you know if this car is actually a good long-term vehicle, but so far, really loving it. Love the color, love the spec, and love that supercharger whine. As always, this has been Tommy with the Fast Lane Car. Check out TFLcar.com, and be sure to stay tuned to TFL Classics for a lot more stuff that you care about, like old pickup trucks. This was just a little self-indulgent thing I did.